Welcome to Reinventing-U. I'm your host, Danielle Silverman. I believe that in today's world of ever-constant evolution, the only career change that matters is when what you do matches who you are and what you believe. This show is where you'll learn how embracing change and reinventing yourself will help you navigate any disruptions and lead a life of happiness and fulfillment, especially in this ever-changing world. Your purpose and your meaning will drive your personal transformation. As I like to say, it's your vision, your life. Be passionate about it. Reinventing-U starts now. Welcome to Reinventing-U, where we talk about all things career-related, where we dive into the challenges of today's work environment, and we come up, hopefully, with actionable solutions. I'm your host, Danielle Silverman. In our last episode, we explored the concept of work-life integration. I came across a quote recently by Cara Delevingne, who's an English model and actress. And in this quote, she said, "When you have balance in your life, work becomes an entirely different experience. There's passion that moves you to a whole new level of fulfillment and gratitude. And that's when you can do your best for yourself and for others." This particular quote really stood out for me because it reminded me of my own business coach, who has stated to me and to others numerous times that when he started taking time for himself and for the things that he loves to do, his business was actually better off for it. So I found that a great example to follow. And today, I've invited someone equally as inspiring. My special guest today is the amazing Juliann Ng. Juliann just happens to be the brilliant person behind my social media posts, but I only recently learned about Juliann's passion for the subject of work-life integration. So it was a natural for me to ask her to come as a guest here today. And if I were to share Juliann's full bio with you, we probably wouldn't have any time for conversation, but I would like to share just a few things. Juliann has spent over 20 years at global and local marketing research agencies, selling, designing, executing research, leading teams, managing clients, and building growth strategies. During the COVID pandemic, she ventured into freelancing because she wanted to pursue new skills and new interest areas. What else? She wanted to pursue a different kind of creativity in her work. And she also works as the executive vice president of strategy and development at a full service market research agency. And she also works as conversion rate optimization researcher at an international firm that specializes in scientifically optimizing the profitability of online businesses. You can imagine how important that is today. And you'd think that would be enough, but no. Juliann also helps small businesses like mine with website design, ghostwriting, and social media marketing. She believes in continuous learning, and being part of the sandwich generation, she's a strong advocate for smart time management as the key to being able to manage a more than full-time career, her kids, a dog, aging parents, regular exercise, cooking most days, reading daily, and pursuing passion projects. Passion projects? What's your passion project? Juliann's is self-publishing a young adult sci-fi fiction novel and writing a screenplay and volunteer activities. Oh, and did I forget to mention she's training for a marathon? Oh my goodness, I'm already tired. Juliann, you may have even more to add, but I want to introduce you live. I'm thrilled to have you here. Please say hello to our audience.
I am so excited to be here, Danielle. Thank you so much for having me as a guest.
I'm thrilled to have you. So let's start at the beginning. When we first talked in person, actually, because we don't live in the same city, you mentioned that you were glad to hear that I was using the term work-life integration rather than work-life balance. So what do you see as the difference between the two? And what makes you prefer the term integration rather than balance?
Yeah, and it was so amazing to meet you in person as well after all those years of just conversing online.
Yeah.
When you mentioned the word integration, it caught me because I remember hearing that for the first time, probably about 6 years ago, maybe 6, 7 years ago. And it struck me as it really resonated with me because I had adopted that type of philosophy anyway, but not really having coined the term for it.
Yeah.
And to me, the big difference is balance implies that you have to do things separately and they kind of reside in these different domains, and you're trying to balance, like you picture a scale with something on one side and something on another side. There's nothing wrong with that balance, but because of the nature of our work, and especially since the pandemic, where people started working from home more often, the lines between work and let's say the rest of your life can be quite blurred. And going back to, and I really do believe in what you do in terms of trying to align and help people find careers that match who they are, right? It's that passion. Once you have that passion for what you do, there doesn't need to be that separation in terms of that balance. I believe that you can make the most of your time because you have flexibility in your schedules if you think about a more integrative approach to work and everything else in your life. It's about being able to fit all the pieces together, not about separating the two and trying to juggle.
It sounds a bit like holistic medicine, what you're describing. You know,
definitely a very holistic approach.
Very holistic approach. Yeah. And I think I agree. That's definitely the way to go. But I'm fascinated by the fact that you seem to be doing so many things. You have myriad roles and all the responsibilities that you juggle. What would you say has the most influenced your approach to work and life?
So there's actually several things, but one thing that comes to mind is early on in my career, I had the privilege of attending Dale Carnegie's course about, how to win friends and influence people. Yeah, and it was an amazing course, and that sticks with me to this day. And one of the lessons that we were taught that Dale Carnegie really promoted is this concept of not sweating the small things in life, right? So he would say, for example, like sometimes when people are driving, they get really angry, or if someone cuts them off in line, they get really angry. But at the end of the day, when you get angry, it's your own blood pressure that rises. You are only hurting yourself and damaging your own health, and it does nothing to the other person that you're angry at, right? You may be in your car swearing or whatever it is, but the other person doesn't know. They don't really care. They're going about their own life. So why get all worked up for nothing? So that has always stuck with me. So it allows me to have a certain calmness as I go about life, no matter what happens, because things never go as planned. Okay, in work and personal life, things don't go as planned. And you have to be ready to just adapt and go with the flow, and always keep in mind that you can make it. You're not alone either. I think that's the really important thing. Social networks and having that social support is critical, but just don't sweat the small stuff.
Yeah. That reminds me actually very much of what I talked about in the last podcast. And I had forgotten the expression, don't sweat the small stuff. But I talked about imperfection versus perfection, where, a lot of people are perfectionists, and today's world just doesn't allow for that because it just takes a lot of time. And really imperfection is about not sweating the small stuff. That's all it is.
It is, because you can get really worked up and into the details of a lot of things. And I mean, I have to admit, I'm kind of a perfectionist too. So I have to balance that or juggle it for myself. Yeah. When it comes to trying to take something all the way to perfection and then realizing, no, it doesn't need to be that way.
Right. So, and that's it, and also just trying different things. You mentioned that as well. That's, what we talk about in reinvention. It's adapting yourself and trying different things. And if something doesn't work, then you try it another way. It's about remaining fluid also, very much so. Um, what would you say is the well, I was thinking of one question, but I'm gonna switch. You accomplish a lot, probably with very little time, given all of the responsibilities you have. But I'm sure you've witnessed other people around you who also seem to accomplish a lot in very little time. Are there common habits or strategies that you employ and that other people employ?
Yes, and I've asked other people too. So leading up to today's podcast, I asked a few of my, like I asked my sisters, I asked some of my close friends, some colleagues, clients, how they manage their schedules and what life hacks they may have.
Yeah.
And I would say that the common theme that has come up is, I know this word multitasking is not popular now because we're supposed to be mindful, live in the moment, right? Focus on one thing at a time. And you know what? There's definitely focus is going to be really important. And I don't know, I'm hoping we get a chance to talk about that. But multitasking, when the combination of tasks makes sense, is actually critical to being able to do more in less time. So for example, if someone is commuting to work, right, they might ride the train, or maybe they drive, then you might want to listen to an audiobook while you're driving or on the train. Or if you're on the train, not like, don't raise your voice too loud because you might bother those around you, but maybe you want to tackle some of those phone calls that you've been meaning to make, whether it's to Rogers or Bell or, all these little type of tasks. You can multitask while you're doing something else that doesn't command your full attention. And that seems to be a big theme.
So I'm glad you gave those examples, because I spoke about multitasking as being an impossible thing to do, only when you have to pay attention to both things that you're doing. What you're talking about is something where you're spending a long time in a train, for example, and you could be working on a document or something like that, or in a car listening to a podcast, as long as you're paying attention to the road. So those examples I have no problem with. Okay, but that's cool. It's to realize that you can do those things, right? Yeah, or speak to somebody on the phone while you're doing dishes or something like that.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I, for example, when I walk the dog every morning, it happens to be a good time when my two sisters are also available in their days, and they're also multitasking. So it's our time to have our daily connection. And to me, that's really important to have that support.
That's a great idea. Yeah. What would you say is the one key element that people should focus on to start with?
Sorry, you actually cut out there for a moment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So what I was asking was, what is the one key element you think that people should focus on to start with?
I would say, if possible, try to organize or declutter your home space. Okay, and I say that because your home is where you do spend a lot of the time. Okay, maybe you do a lot of traveling, maybe you work and have to commute and spend many hours at work away from home, but home is still should be some form of a sanctuary. And if things are disorganized in your home, it can add clutter to your own mind, right? And take up mental space that should be free for other things, to focus on the more important things. So by, let's say, tidying up your home, your office space, just a basic thing. Now, if you can, I do highly recommend Marie Kondo's book, which many people probably be familiar with now, the the life-changing, what's it called, life-changing magic of tidying up.
Yep.
And you could go all out and do one big cleanse, is what she advocates for, but that may or may not be realistic for everyone. Right. So, but I do think some basic putting of the home and organization and things in order helps to kind of just clear some of that physical clutter that then links to mental clutter and allows you to start with a cleaner slate.
Right. So I think she has some she used to have anyway, a series on Netflix I forget what it's called, but yeah. So you mentioned decluttering your space, organizing your space. I imagine having a space, for where you work, being very different from your living space. Is there anything else besides the decluttering of the space or the organizing of the space that you find important for people to focus on?
This would be right up your alley, Danielle. It's finding what you love. I think you need to know what matters most to you. You need to prioritize things in your life. There's no point to try to, when we think about time management, it's not about trying to squeeze everything possible into limited time in a day or a week or a month. You need to know what actually matters first. That's really, really important, because once you know what matters, then you can prioritize it. And once you prioritize it, you know the things that you can choose to ignore. And things that you choose to ignore and not do are as important as the things you choose to do.
They are important, but sometimes things you have to do certain things, especially in your work and also in your personal life. Like, I don't enjoy doing the laundry, but somehow it's got to get done. So what are the things, and priorities are, people understand priorities, but they don't always work with them very well. Like they'll start with, I'll start with the easiest things first, get them out of the way. That's what I used to do. And because I would find that, okay, I felt like I've accomplished something. But in the end, the difficult thing was always there and it weighed on me. So, what are your suggestions for things like that, about how to figure out what the priorities are, besides doing what you love?
Yes. So, in the research world, we think a lot in terms of like quadrants, right? So when you think about quadrants, it's usually like two axes, and then you've got the four parts, right? Mm-hmm. And if you think about tasks, let's say, that you have to do, and more like the daily basis type of tasks, the things that you may have to do for work or for your personal life, think in terms of one axis being urgency, and then the other one being important. So something that is both urgent and important should be tended to right away. Yeah. Something that is urgent and not important probably needs to be attended to right away as well, because it's urgent, right? But you might have things that are important but not urgent, and that can possibly wait, right? So obviously, this time management is a really complex type of topic. Yeah. And I really do hope that I do this justice for your audience, is because there's so many facets to it. And in my mind too, I'm processing and making sure that, we can distill the most important points for everyone to remember. But this idea of like prioritizing based on urgency and degree of importance is one very simple framework. Right.
The issue I have with time management, regardless of what technique you use, I know a lot of people who, like me actually, are very, carefree, and they do things as they come. And when you talk about structuring something, then it becomes a little bit more difficult. What do you say to those people who feel bound, feel confined by the concept of setting priorities and setting times for certain things?
Yeah, you know what? And I would actually prefer to be less structured myself. It's not really fun when you're trying to fit things into a box of some sort or into a schedule. Yeah. But I would say that structure, at least in the form of some routine, is actually liberating. Okay, because routine may sound boring, and routine to me doesn't mean doing the exact same thing over and over again, day after day. It means that you dedicate and you organize your time in a certain way across different types of tasks and demands in your life. And you kind of stick with that and you repeat that, and so you know what to expect. It's like with people and dogs. I'm a dog lover. You're a dog lover.
Yes.
Dogs, they thrive on knowing a routine, what to expect, because there's security in that.
Yes.
Right? So it's chaos if day after day you have no idea when you're going to eat, where you're going to sleep. Let's say there's just too much going on. Then how could you possibly focus on what's important? Never mind like what's urgent if you can't even have some basic routine in place. So I still say like we don't have to think in terms of like structure, because I also prefer to be carefree, but it's almost a necessity for anyone who is interested in trying to get more out of their lives by being able to focus on what matters and having the time for that.
Yeah, that's excellent. Actually, as you were talking, I was thinking of the example of the first dog I had, because I used to be a person who hated routine. Don't talk to me about routine. It doesn't enter my life. When I got my first dog, I learned that he needed a routine and that it was important. Otherwise, he would be very anxious. He was an anxious dog to begin with. And what I found over time is that I started to feel calmer just because I had to follow that routine. And so it completely changed my view of this whole thing. So thank you for those examples. They're perfect. I think this is a good place to take a break. So, Juliann, your examples are extraordinary. And you also mentioned, I love the examples you gave, but Marie Kondo, Dale Carnegie. Dale Carnegie, in fact, one of his books was How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. And that made me think that what I find very common among most people, and particularly my clients as well, is that they're either fearful or they're anxious. And the fear or the anxiety stops them from being able to be productive and also stops them from being able to enjoy life. So I don't know if you've found that as well, but if you have any strategies to recommend, how would you help people navigate these emotions?
So I love that book, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living.
Yeah.
It's funny, I don't consider myself a worry wart, but I do worry. Like everybody, we all have our own anxieties and we all worry about different things.
For sure.
And I'm very prone to overthinking as well. So I just happened to pick up this book and I read it and I just thought, wow. So first of all, it reinforced and reminded me of some of the principles I learned when I took, the course way back when I first started my career. And I keep this book by my bedside, like all times I can refer back to it.
Wow. Okay.
So I think what's really important in terms of the strategy is that there is nothing that is a one-size-fits-all strategy.
Yeah, that's true.
And so what I like about how Dale Carnegie set up his book is that each chapter, he goes through a different kind of tactic or strategy that you could take. I mean, overall, we're all trying to reduce worry and anxiety. Yeah. But he has different ways and different anecdotal stories that he tells that will really help bring the points home and, help internalize them for people. Yeah. So, I mean, I have the book right here by my side right now.
I was going to ask you, which is there one in particular that stands out for you?
So here, in a nutshell, he talks about how to break the worry habit before it breaks you. Okay. And rule number 1 he has is crowd worry out of your mind by keeping busy. Okay. So for some people who've gone through, let's say, a traumatic life event, right? It could be hard to get past that. You need to spend time to acknowledge those feelings, but then it's time to move on. And one of the ways that can work for people, depending on their job or role, whatever they do in life, is to really immerse themselves in their work, let's say, whatever they choose to do. And by doing that, they'll wake up one day and realize, oh, for the first time, I didn't think about this traumatic event that happened. And I feel differently about it now. I've gotten past it. So that can actually be a tactic that works. Like I said, the reason why I really like this is because it's not one size fits all. Someone might think, oh no, that I don't want to do that. I don't want to bury myself in my work. Maybe they don't like their work right now because they have yet to find what they're passionate about. They don't want to do that. So, but that's one rule. The other rule is don't fuss about trifles. This is don't sweat the small stuff that I was talking about earlier. Don't let these little things, the small termites in life, ruin your happiness. In that chapter where he talks about that, he talks about this species of tree, which is so strong that it can withstand, let's say, a hurricane and really extreme weather conditions. But yet these tiny termites, if they get into the tree and eat away at the tree, and there's enough of them, it could actually take the tree down completely. So he talks about don't let these small things ruin your happiness. Number 3, use the law of averages to outlaw your worries, meaning ask yourself, if you worry about every single possibility that might happen and things that might go wrong, ask yourself, what are the odds against this thing happening at all? Think about the law of averages. What is the likelihood? And chances are it's really, really small. So just put it out of your mind. Don't spend all your energy worrying about that. Number 4 is really important. He says, cooperate with the inevitable. If you know a circumstance is beyond your power to change or revise, because you can't control everything in life, say to yourself, it is so, it cannot be otherwise. So it's the acceptance. So sometimes, you change and you're proactive about what can be changed. But there are certain things that may truly be outside of your control. And when that's the case, don't spend your time worrying about it. Just accept it, right? And then move on. And then rule number 5, and there's just one more after this, is put a stop loss order to your worries. Decide just how much anxiety a thing may be worth and refuse it to give it any more. So he's acknowledging that it's okay to worry because there's some big things that happen in life and they warrant worry. But decide, you know what? I'm going to spend, let's say, the next week or next 2 weeks, I'm going to give myself the permission to worry about it, to fret about it, to, vent about it, to my social network, whatever it may be. But after that 2 weeks is over, I'm done. So that's what he's saying. Put a stop loss order, just set yourself a time when you can wallow as much as you want, worry as much as you want, but then you have to move on. And then rule number 6 is let the past bury its dead. Don't saw sawdust. So stop worrying about what has happened because it's done with, and just move on.
Absolutely. All very wise words. And I think one could say he was very much ahead of his time, because we're hearing this kind of thing in different ways, obviously, today and for a very long time now. So he really was very much ahead of his time. And it's interesting because I just this morning read a discussion on Facebook between colleagues, or among colleagues, actually, because there's several people responding. I talk about in Reinvention, I talk about the fear exercise, and really acknowledging what your fears are, and then writing them down, and then thinking about, okay, what is actually under your control and what is not under your control, and realizing that probably most things are under your control, and spend 80% of your time focusing on what you can control. And so there was a whole discussion about, well, does that mean I spend 20% of my time worrying about what I can't control? And it was very interesting conversation. And ultimately, it's really about focusing your time on what you can control, and which is in part what he's saying as well. There are some things that you just have to leave by the wayside, because you can't do anything about them anyway. And the past is one of those things for sure.
That's right.
Yeah. It's interesting because there are so many, I mentioned 80% and 20%, and this 80-20 rule is everywhere. It's in economics, it's everywhere. It's also in time management, right?
definitely in time management. And in fact, the 80-20 principle, there is a book that I highly, highly recommend. It's called The 80-20 Principle
Okay.
by Richard Koch, Koch.
Okay.
And he goes into it from the professional perspective, like how 80-20 applies to businesses where generally 80% of your revenue only comes from 20% of your customers, sometimes even less, it might be 10% accounting for 90% of your revenue.
Right.
Where, let's say when you think about work productivity, it's probably only 20% of your work hours that are producing 80% of the real valuable output. Yes. And the rest of the time is not really valuable or adding value to your clients or, to your job. So he talks about, how to optimize based on focusing on that 20% that really matters for work. But then he has a whole section at the back of the book about how to apply it to your personal life.
Oh, cool.
And in that section, he's even done as a follow-up, based on all the reviews that people posted about his book, that some people are like, oh, you should keep your 80-20 rule to just business and time management, let's say. Yeah. But it should not apply to personal lives, because that seems to be almost stripping away a certain humanity to things and making it seem like a rigid system, like all we care about is output.
Yeah.
Right? Because sometimes there are things that are less tangible, like have a softer quality to them, that may not seem productive, but really matter in our personal lives. And so people are like, that section's a little bit controversial, but when it comes to time management, going back to the 80-20, it's really just realizing that you just focus on the 20% of the stuff that makes the biggest impact. For example, if you're producing, like in the market research world, we write research reports for clients, right? We summarize all the data that we collect into some type of story about the consumer insights or business-to-business insights. And you can spend a lot of time making that report perfect, right? But if you do that, it's going to be at the expense of all these other tasks and things that you have to do. Now, we do want to over-deliver and make our clients really happy, but at the same time, are they really going to notice if that font is not exactly right on one particular page? Maybe, right? Like maybe, depending on who your client is, they might actually notice, and then you have to know that matters. So to me, it's a combination of understanding who your audience is and what's important to them, right? And then make sure that you spend all of your effort on that 20% that's really important to them, because that will give you 80% of the return.
Right. This is also fascinating, and I know that you've read so many books. Is there another one with a completely different perspective that made you stop and think about what we're talking about, which is how to best integrate life and work?
Yeah, there's so many.
Well,
but I would say that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that one that is really different, and I don't even remember how I came across it, is a book called Algorithms to Live By.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so there are two authors to that book, and basically they take a computer science approach to life, and that's why the word algorithm.
Yeah.
So think about computers. I mean, they are in a way like us in terms of our brains and how we process information and have to do tasks, right? So he equates everything in terms of how to optimize things and how computers work to optimize their output with how it applies to our daily lives. And there's a whole chapter about time management. And so, for example, and I thought this was so fascinating, our computers, let's say our computers are always keeping an eye on us because they need to be responsive, right? So let's say I'm going to go reach for my mouse now. the computer may be running some other programs in the background right now to keep, the screen on, to do like all these tasks and have all the documents I've opened on all my different screens active, so that if I were to go into it, it's readily available. It's not like it's hanging or frozen or anything like that, right?
Mhm.
So it has to do a lot of background activity in processing. But right now I haven't touched my mouse for the last, I don't know, like 30 minutes. If I reach and touch it now and move it, the computer has to respond and know that, oh, the mouse, it's time for the mouse to move where I need it to move. But while I was resting, it was doing its own thing, but it had to constantly keep an eye on me, right?
Mhm.
So what the computer science has done is it's done research to understand what is the maximum amount of time that is detectable by the human to notice if the mouse has moved in step with me or not. Like, what is that maximum allowable time? And so what they've done is configured the system to work with that type of limit, to be what's noticeable, and to give them free up time for the other processing. So how does that apply? Yes, go ahead.
Question. No, I'm thinking, going, wow, yeah, how does that apply?
Yeah, and so how does that apply is that when it comes to, let's say, emails,
Mhm.
when it comes to other tasks in your life and all of these daily things that you're bombarded with, think about that same, because we're always juggling responsiveness with output.
Mhm.
That is critical. Responsiveness with output. Clients email you, right? You get a whole thing, they're pinging you, they're like, something comes up on a text message, I'm getting something on Microsoft Teams. It's like you're overwhelmed because there's so much. But think about the same, like that analogy with the computer. How much time can go by where I'm still going to be perceived as responsive enough, so such that I don't need to react to every little thing the second it comes in?
Mhm.
So for emails, if depending on your role, is it okay that you check them only every 2 hours? Is it okay if you just check them morning, lunchtime, and towards the end of the day? Are you working with clients in different time zones? Where, like in my role with conversion rate experts, they're based in the UK, but they're clients all over the world. If I know a client is in Australia, I don't need to like worry about doing everything so quickly during my daytime, because I can talk about work-life integration. Maybe I can have my dentist appointment during the day, and then I can respond to that email in my evening, which is going to be timely for them based on their hours. So it's understanding what is that maximum kind of allowable time that you can play with to give yourself that flexibility to manage your different tasks.
Wow. So you're what we're going into is really understanding what's best for you and for your environment, your clients, your whatever, and acting on that as well. Just trying to figure out what these things are and not just doing them blindly because you're supposed to do them in a certain way, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Excellent advice, and an interesting way of looking at things, actually. Very interesting. So we're going to take another break now, and when we come back, we'll continue. So welcome back, Juliann. Your insight is amazing. Um, I want to take a second to talk about your passion projects, because they're out of the ordinary, not what most people do. You talked about self-publishing, just that, self-publishing, but having written a young adult sci-fi fiction novel, having written a screenplay. These aren't the usual quote unquote hobbies one might expect. And even before the pandemic, you talked about um, what's the word I'm looking for? Planning for a marathon, and then actually running a marathon. These are pretty intensive pursuits. How do you carve out time for these pursuits? What are some of the tactics or techniques that you use?
So some of the tactics are things that we've already talked about, right? So when you start off with like less cluttered space, it means I have less cleaning to do on a day-to-day basis. So that frees up time. It's all about finding these little pockets of time. But in addition to that, when I think about the book, right, just looking, like staring at a blank screen is extremely daunting, right? I had some ideas in my head, but where do you even start? And this is where it links back to my point earlier about routine.
Mm-hmm.
I told myself that I need to write every day, but it's not about all or nothing, right? Similar to training for the marathon, it's not all or nothing. It doesn't mean that I have to write X number of pages every day. I give myself that leeway that some days I may write one sentence. But just to have that discipline of setting aside a certain amount of time after dinner, after all the chores are done, to sit down before bed. And that's like, you have to know your own like chronotype in terms of your clock, right? Your internal clock of when is most productive for you. I tend to get a good energy as the evening wears on, but I like to wake up late. Unlike, I'm not a morning person, but I knew that every night before bed, I could probably write for about an hour. Some nights it might be half an hour, it might be 5 minutes, like I said, but that's okay. So I stuck to a routine of that. And then knowing that maybe on the weekend, I might be able to write a bit more. I also ended up using some of my vacation time. I was working at a full-time job at that point in time when I wrote the book to do, like, say, for the final editing, when I knew I needed a big chunk of time uninterrupted. I chose to take a vacation day. So that's how I managed to, let's say, integrate that into my work life and personal life.
Ultimately, it's about getting to know who you are, right? What you said at the very beginning, and what I am a huge proponent of, because small things add up, right? So when we think about who we are, we need to understand where our energy is as well. I'm like you, I like to sleep in, although with a little dog, it's not so possible anymore. But and I have more energy in the morning, and then I get energy again late at night. But don't talk to me between 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening and 9 o'clock at night. The energy just isn't there. So, and everybody is different, right? So it's about finding that time that is right for you and not pushing yourself to do something when you feel you're just not able to, but find something else to do. That, maybe it is cleaning the house, or maybe it is doing the dishes, or spending time with the kids, or talking on the phone with friends, or going for a walk, whatever it is, that will actually rejuvenate you in some way.
Yeah, I love that you made that point, because it's very important. People feel the need to, like society has certain norms still of what you're supposed to do when. Right. And if you work a 9-to-5 job, you may have no choice but to work during 9 to 5. So if you know that you start to get a slump, in the afternoon, you may not have the luxury of going for a walk. Not everyone does. It depends on what you do. So that is completely okay. But I think the point really is to try to maximize your time to do the productive things when you know you've got the best energy. And to do other types of tasks, because you can even manage this in your 9 to 5, do other types of tasks that don't require as much brain power, let's say, during the times when you know your energy is a little bit lower.
But it reminds me also of the pandemic, in my opinion anyways. I started when I get passionate about something. The pandemic actually helped us in a certain way, because we now have remote work and hybrid work. And I think that works really well for a lot of people. Some people love being in an office because of the social aspect of it. But at the same time, when you are working remotely, whether it's hybrid or completely remotely, you have that opportunity to focus on what your needs are and still be productive. I remember, I mean, when I was a manager and senior manager in a corporation, and people there was a norm that you had to work certain hours, and you took a half hour for lunch or an hour for lunch, whatever it was, and 15 minutes break in the morning and a 15-minute break in the afternoon. And I always thought this was ridiculous. And I didn't care what hours, if people wanted to come in at 7:30 and leave at 4:30, and we didn't know from flexible hours in those days, right? But if they felt more comfortable in doing that, I would say, as long as you put in the work, the quality is good, and it's timely, you're not missing any deadlines, then I don't care when you do it. Really. And I don't know if I was ahead of my time or what, but it's like today we have that possibility. And so when I hear about organizations that have software that monitors how much time people spend on the computer, it boggles my mind. It really does. Because for me, what I look at is the productivity. What is the actual outcome? Is it good outcome? That's what matters. And I think that most organizations need to do that. I'm sorry, end of rant.
But I agree with you wholeheartedly on that point. I never believed in policing people's time. And you are definitely ahead of your time on that type of thinking. Because even to this day, many organizations still don't think that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have to say, like, there's certain roles, like talk about like my point about responsiveness earlier, where you're expected, if you're frontline customer service, you may have no choice, right? You have to be there in a certain window of time because that's when you're picking up the phone, responding to emails.
Right.
And that, there's not that much you can do about that because you do need to be there. But in many other roles, that flexibility should absolutely be there so that people work when they're most productive, and when they can have that proper work-life integration, they'll be much happier in their jobs. And when happier employees produce better work.
Yes, absolutely. I was reminiscing with a colleague of mine a few weeks ago about the Gallup reports that come out every year. And we were saying, this year's report was amazing because employee engagement is up, right? From 21% last year to 23% this year. Oh my goodness, we're so excited. But if it's 23%, that means that 77% are disengaged, right? And it's only up by 2%. And my colleague was saying, yeah, but you know what? It's been like that for more than 20 years. So nothing has really changed. But maybe that 2% is the beginning of something. I don't know. I've veered off here to something completely different because I really am. I get very upset when I hear these things. I think my microphone is falling. What's really also important is recognizing what is your goal? What is it that you want to do? And what is it that you want to achieve? All these people talking about SMART goals and things like that. Yes, it's important. It's important to prioritize. It's important to do what you love. All of that is important. But to understand how much you can do in what you can give to others, what you need to give to yourself, and prioritize yourself first. Prioritize your own needs. Because if you don't, like the example of my business coach, who plays basketball as often as, even though he's a short man, he loves playing basketball. And when he does it, he feels replenished. And then he can give his absolute best to everything else in his life, including his personal relationships and his business. So I think it's the same thing we're saying here. We're saying you can get anything accomplished as long as you're paying attention to those things. And I don't mean the small detail kind of things, but to those things that matter to you.
Yes, it does. It may seem like it sounds selfish to put yourself first, but it's anything but, because when your own, let's say, health is failing or your mental state is in disorder, how could you possibly help anyone else?
Right. It's the old analogy of taking the mask in the airplane when there's a drop in the pressure and putting it on yourself first before you put it on your children or anybody else. You have to be well in order to be yourself, in order to be able to help others get well. And the same applies to work. But it also applies to what you do, and to loving what you do, to learning to love, to becoming to love what you do, right? For those in the audience who are currently feeling overwhelmed with their responsibilities, and especially if, like you, if they're part of a sandwich generation, what's a piece of unconventional advice that you might offer?
There's no, I mean, I think nothing unconventional comes to mind necessarily. Okay. But you mentioned this word in your opening comment today. And to me, it's critical and core to, I think, who I am and how my outlook on life, which is gratitude. Okay, I started keeping a gratitude journal where every day it's like an app on the phone that just prompts you, name 3 things that you're grateful for today, right? And it could be little things. They don't have to be big things. And this is where it's kind of like the opposite of don't sweat the small stuff. But when it comes to gratitude, the small stuff actually does count.
Yes.
It's knowing that as hard as life gets, as overwhelmed as you might feel some days, what can you still be grateful for that is going right in your life, that has happened, that put a smile on your face, somebody else's face? I think if you approach life with a lot of gratitude and appreciating things, it's going to go a long way in terms of setting that foundation to everything else that you do.
And it's not about blindly writing, oh, I'm grateful that the sun is shining today.
No, not at all.
It's really about thinking about, and I had another coach who, her favorite question was always, what's not wrong today? Because we always tend to think about what's wrong. So her question is, what's not wrong today? And I think that's also a beautiful thing. You're right. We have to look at the positive things in life that are happening to us every day, whether that's just, looking at the sunshine and saying, I feel good because it's not raining today. And just think about, okay, so how does it make me feel? What is it that is going on inside my body? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What color is it? That sort of thing. And trying to find that gratitude as opposed to just saying it, I think that's...
Yeah, and when you feel it, it impacts your interactions with those around you. And that positive energy is something that gets transferred. So it's really important that it starts from inside, and then you can have that positive influence.
Juliann, if you had to describe your approach to life using a metaphor, what would that be? And why would you choose that metaphor?
So can I give you 2 metaphors, one related to time management topic, and then one about general life? Okay. So with time management, I had this visual of the game Tetris.
Okay.
You familiar with Tetris? So all these blocks of different shapes and they fall. There's a clock that is ticking, right? And you have to make sure everything, as soon as everything falls neatly into one row, it clears that row so that you don't get overwhelmed with blocks, right? And the whole thing just crashes.
Yeah.
So when I think about time management, I'm constantly thinking about the sequencing of how different pieces of my task and my life fit together to optimize them so that they clear that line, like in Tetris. Okay. So each day, inbox things come up, personal stuff comes up, like all these different demands. But I'm like trying to optimize how they fit. So for example, if I'm going to visit my parents, they're both in long-term care, because they've got some chronic illnesses and they're not able to live alone anymore. So my sister and I, we visit them on a weekly basis, right? So, but they're about like 20 minutes of drive away, and like kind of in another direction that's not necessarily super convenient. So I always think about, all right, if I'm going to drive there, what are my other errands or things that I can do that make sense going in that direction?
For sure.
So it's constantly trying to, I talk about integration again, fit the different pieces together. So I think of it, my time management, like Tetris. How can the pieces fit together nicely so that it's...
I do that too, actually. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you said there's another one you said for general, we actually have just a few seconds left.
Oh, a few seconds.
Word
Okay.
that you want to leave with our listeners?
Okay, so I would say that if you think about life like riding a motorcycle, okay? And the reason why I say motorcycle is because you're immersed in your environment. You're not surrounded by, let's say, a physical barrier, right? So you're immersed in your environment and you enjoy the journey as much as the destination, right? So you have a destination in mind. But when people go riding on their motorcycles, it's not usually just about getting from point A to point B as quickly as possible. It's truly about enjoying the ride, right? So, and then with that as well is it's really important that you look forward, you look ahead, you have to know where you're going. So if you're going to need to make right turn, let's say, you don't look to the ground, you don't look at the handlebars because that will just drive you into the ground. You actually have to look where you want the bike to go. So you look ahead and the bike will follow your movement. So it points to the importance of looking forward, knowing your direction, right? And be forward looking, but at the same time, you have to have full awareness of everything that's going on around you. You do peek behind your, like at the rear view mirror to see what's going on behind, but also to the sides and also directly in front of you, because you might hit a pothole or an animal that's on the side, on the road, etc. So it's that balance of looking ahead to the future, but also being aware of what's immediately around you and focusing on the present, like what's right in front of you, while enjoying the whole journey as you...
I love that analogy. That's exactly what I do in my work. I start with people's vision because we need to look at the future, and it's also fun and optimistic to think, but we also have to absolutely enjoy the journey and learn about ourselves along the way. So looking in every direction about ourselves. Love, love, love the analogy. Juliann, it's been an absolute delight to have you here with me today. I look forward to speaking with you again soon. And to my listeners, I want to say here is to your career reinvention and to your life reinvention. Enjoy every moment. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to Reinventing-U with me, your host, Danielle Silverman. Tune in on the second and fourth Monday each month at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific on transformationtalkradio.com. Join me and feel inspired and optimistic about your future. We only get one life, so embrace change and thrive with me. Find work that aligns best with your soul and what you enjoy. For more information, go to reinventingyou.com.